Now in our 26th year, a quarter century of service to the worldwide amateur radio community, we are This Week in Amateur Radio, your all-amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service of the air. This is edition number 1366 with a release and air date of Saturday, May 3rd, 2025. Please take the program to your air following the Q-tone. Heard every week on the amateur radio bands all around the world, broadcast on low-power AM and FM stations all across the U.S., and podcast on the Internet since 1993, we are This Week in Amateur Radio, the worldwide premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service of the air. Here are the stories for release around the earth as we come to air with edition number 1366 of This Week in Amateur Radio. The APRS awards the first Worked All States Award for the 630-meter band. The clock is ticking down to the 2025 Dayton Hamvention. The 2025 Hudson Division Convention is scheduled for July 13th. We'll have all the details. Amateurs in Brazil gain access to the 11-meter band using their call signs, while Italian amateurs gain access to the 8-meter band. A new low-power FM broadcast station license is awarded to an amateur radio group. Soon you will be able to augment your GPS system with signals from your local television station. We'll tell you all about it. Amateur radio comes to internet broadcast stations. The BBC is facing its charter expiration and is looking to rechart its course. The APRS announces changes in leadership in the Atlantic Division. The league announces the forums it will hold at the upcoming Dayton Hamvention. Radio comes to the rescue once again. We will have the story. You can own a piece of New York City broadcast history. We'll tell you how you can do that. And it's an oldie but a goodie. It's something you may want to see very soon. We will have all the details coming up in this week's report. These headline stories will come to you in a moment along with this week's special features. We'll visit with Bruce Page, KK5DO, and get an update from AMSAT and what's new with all of those amateur satellites in orbit. Australia's own Onno Benshoff, VK6FLAB, and Foundations of Amateur Radio will tell us how to be an amateur radio operator without either a radio or an antenna. Our own amateur radio historian, Will Rogers, K5WLR, will be here with another edition of A Century of Amateur Radio. This week, Will takes us aboard the Wayback Machine to the early and mid-1920s to answer the question, what is an amateur? We will have this month's volunteer monitoring report, and we will stop by and visit with Bill Sawyers, AJ8B in the DX Corner, with all of the latest news on DXpeditions, DX, upcoming radio sport contests, and more. That's all straight ahead as North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service, This Week in Amateur Radio, takes to the air right now. Reporting from our headquarters studio facility just outside of stormy Albany, New York, I'm George, W2XBS.
And reporting this week from our news bureau in Syracuse, New York, from the shack of K2MST, inside the Museum of Science and Technology, I'm Chris Perrine, KB2FAF.
And reporting from our news bureau in Lebanon, Tennessee, where country music is always shining bright, I'm Al Shephard, WK8W.
And from the sunny Space Coast in Florida, I'm Ed Johnson, W2PH.
And reporting from our stormy news bureau in Knoxville, Tennessee, I'm Josh Marler, AA4WX.
And reporting from our Troy, New York news bureau, where we can finally go outside without our winter coats on, I'm Eric, Kilo Delta 2, Romeo Juliet X-Ray.
And reporting from our ham radio outpost in the Catskill Mountains of upstate New York, where spring is in the air, along with several watts of handheld VHF electromagnetic radiation, I'm Don Hulick, K2ATJ.
And reporting from our news bureau in Fayetteville, Arkansas, I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR, where we have been dodging rain, hail, and lightning with an occasional glimpse of the sun and watching everything turning nice and green.
Leading off our news this week, Eric Tuchansky, NO3M of Sagerstown, Pennsylvania, has been issued the first ARRL Worked All States Award for the 630-meter band. With all the details on this first-of-its-kind record, we go to league headquarters, where John Ross, KD8 IDJ, files this special report.
He picked up that award at ARRL headquarters in Newington, Connecticut on April 21st, 2025. It was the accumulation of years of study, work, and experimentation. Tuchansky had a draw to 160 meters early in his ham radio career. He was active in contesting and DXing on top band. When he moved to his current home, he was able to experiment with lower FER operation. When 630 meters opened up to amateur radio use, he got straight to work. It seemed like an unreachable goal at the time, but patience and persistence, as well as gaining more and more of an understanding of the capabilities of the band over the years, proved otherwise, said Tuchansky. His transmit antenna system has been a journey in trial, error, and fire. He's a member of what he calls the Hall of Flames. Tuchansky said there were several other operators right behind him, with WAS almost completed as well. In fact, ARRL Awards branch manager Sharon Taratula just announced that Edward Gray, W0SD of Salem, South Dakota, has been awarded the 630-meter Worked All States second place award. Tuchansky currently has a DXCC total of 17 on the band. He plans to contribute technical articles about operating on 630 meters to QEX magazine in the coming months. And all ARRL members have digital access to QEX and 3 other high-quality publications. You can read more about Tuchansky's award at arrl.org. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
Tuchansky went on to say that he definitely learned that good quality insulators do make a difference. After years of work and refinement of matching and loading techniques, his 67-foot vertical with 8 sloping top-loading wires as a wire skirt over a large radial field have proven to be the ticket to success. For reception, I have always used dedicated receive antennas, which have included phased beverages, a full-sized 8-circle vertical array, and various others like a terminated loop, said Tuchansky. As news of the award achievement spread in the amateur community, even many longtime hams with little or no experience on 630 meters wondered how it worked. Tuchansky says Alaska and Hawaii proved especially challenging. The states were certainly a challenge, Alaska perhaps more so. However, both locations had excellent resident operators and stations, and through persistent attempts and the right conditions, two-way QSOs were completed. I have a few CW QSOs with K9FD, KH6, who is a silent key, which still stands as the distance record on 630 for CW. I also have the overall distance record for a QSO with VK4YB via JT9, which took a long time and many attempts, finally finding success on a morning near the equinox, he said. Most of the contacts on the band happen just like any other band, says Tuchansky, from getting on and calling CQ or replying to one. Very few of his contacts on there were scheduled. It takes an experimenter's mind and a lot of patience to be successful on the band, but like with any other operating specialty, there is a community ready to help. The 630-meter community is very diverse, but there are a number of members that come from particular backgrounds, including microwave operators, EME, top banders, and other weak signal communications. The thing we have in common is that we are experimenters and enjoy a bit of a challenge, exclaimed Tuchansky.
You're listening to North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, distributed worldwide at twiar.net.
We're just 2 weeks away from Dayton Hamvention, held May 16th through the 18th, 2025 in Xenia, Ohio. ARRL invites all radio amateurs attending Hamvention to stop into our large exhibit area. We'll be located in our usual spot in the Tesla building. As we all enjoy the peak of Solar Cycle 25, there's never been a better time to step up your radio sport game. The ARRL Radio Sport Forum this year is entitled Level Up and is scheduled for Sunday from 10:30 to 11:30 a.m. in Forum Room 2. ARRL Radio Sport leaders will share an update on 2025 contests, award hunting, and other radio sport activities like the International Amateur Radio Union 100th Anniversary Activity and 2025 ARRL Field Day June 28th and 29th. Also learn how to find a contest club in your area to get a seat on a winning team. There are many other ARRL-sponsored forums at Hamvention. Find more information at www.arrl.org/expo.
The 2025 ARRL Hudson Division Convention will be held at the Sussex County Amateur Radio Club Hamfest on Sunday, July 13 of 2025. The SCARC Hamfest will be at the Sussex County Farm and Horse Show Fairgrounds, 37 Plains Road in Augusta, New Jersey. According to the Hudson Division Director, Ed Wilson, N2XDD, several ARRL events are planned to take place as part of the convention. These include an ARRL membership forum, a clean signal update from the ARRL lab, and possibly a remote radio demonstration. Wilson's also asking about the inclusion of possible 30 to 45-minute presentations as part of the convention offering. A VE testing session will be held starting at 10 a.m. at the Fairgrounds Administration Building, Sussex County Farm and Horse Show Fairgrounds. The site offers 270,000 square feet of outdoor tailgate space, which is over 6 acres, and 10,000 square feet of indoor space. There will be food, door prizes, and plenty of parking. Admission is $8. Indoor tables are $25. Tailgate space, including one admission, is $25. Gates will open at 6 a.m. on July 13 for sellers and tailgaters and 8 o'clock for buyers. Vendors are reminded that there is no electricity available outdoors. Please bring your own table and chair. Saturday evening setup is available after 6 p.m. Overnight camping is available. No pets are permitted on the fairground property. No food or drink sales by sellers are permitted, and they must leave the space clean. For further information and advanced registration, write to Brian Brunsack, KC2YON, Post Office Box 312 in Augusta, New York, 07822, or email hamfest@scarcnj.org. Talk-in will be available on the 147.300 repeater with a PL of 151.4. For more details, visit SussexHamfest, all one word, .org.
Brazil's telecommunications regulator, Anatel, has two big changes planned for the nation's hams. The Brazilian regulator will no longer require Morse code for amateur licenses under the changes that have been under consideration since 2020. The regulator will update content in its exams for its 3 license classes. This is one of several changes contained in a resolution released on April 28th by Anatel. The resolution also grants hams the ability to operate on Citizens Band 11-meter frequencies. They must identify with their call signs and are limited to 10 watts of power in AM and 25 watts of power in SSB. They must also stay within authorized channels. The regulator expects to move ahead with these changes after a 6-month period in which supplementary regulations will also be issued.
The FCC has granted a low-power FM license to a group of Colorado radio enthusiasts, some of whom are also hams. If you want to hear a limited sampling of what will soon be broadcast on Colorado's newest low-power FM radio station, you can tune in online for now. In early April, the FCC gave a green light to the Colorado Society of Wireless and Broadcast Engineering, a collective that described itself to the FCC as local university students, amateur radio operators, and engineers. The group has proposed a 100-watt station on 107.1 FM. The website that previews some of the programming belongs to the Society's founder, Vlad Fomachek, KX4TH. The station's December 2023 application was approved by the FCC after rejecting claims from the license holder of a nearby translator station that the minimum separation distance between the translator and the proposed low-power FM station was not met. According to a report on the Radio World website, the low-power station is designed to benefit its participants as well as its listeners by providing training in audio, computer, electrical, and mechanical engineering. The group has also said that it hopes to present community programming, collaborative programming from the nearby university, and will experiment with open-source digital HD radio.
The Heritage CQ Amateur Radio Hall of Fame, created by longtime amateur radio publisher Richard Ross, Kilo 2 Mike Golf Alpha Silent Key, will continue to honor amateur radio operators on a new section of the hamgallery.com website. John Ross, KD8IDJ, is here with the details.
CQ Magazine ceased publication in October of 2023, and Ross passed away on April 27, 2024, and the change was made with the permission of his widow, Kathy. The Heritage CQ Amateur Radio Hall of Fame honors licensed amateur radio operators and non-licensed individuals who have made significant contributions to amateur radio, their professional careers, or to other aspects of world affairs. A select and diverse group of amateurs will administer the new website and review submissions. The 2025 inductees are Professor Jim Brakall, WA3FET, Angel Vasquez, WP3R, and Wayne Overbeck, PhD, N6NB, Silent Key. The nomination deadline for 2025 has passed, but information can be found on the web at Nomination Process for Heritage CQ Amateur Radio Hall of Fame. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
Taking a closer look at this year's Hall of Fame inductees, Professor Jim Brakall, Whiskey Alpha 3 Fox Echo Tango. Dr. Brakall's work has been instrumental in amateur radio antenna technology development for decades. Dr. Brakall has authored numerous peer-reviewed scientific articles and books. He is an IEEE Life Fellow, a Radio Club of America Fellow, and has been awarded the Sarnoff Award, the Dr. Ulrich L. Rode Technical Award at the RCA, and the Technical Achievement Award at the Dayton Hamvention. Next, Angel M. Vasquez, Whiskey Papa 3 Romeo. Vasquez graduated from the City University of New York. He worked at WNYC as a radio engineer before moving back to Arecibo, Puerto Rico, and taking the job at the Arecibo Observatory in 1977, rising to become the head of telescope operations. He has presented numerous of talks on the Arecibo Observatory and his amateur radio experiences at the Dayton Hamvention Antenna Forums, RCA Speaker Series, HamSci conventions, and multiple amateur radio clubs around the world. He was awarded Puerto Rico Amateur of the Year in 2017. And finally, Wayne Overbeck, Ph.D., November 6, November Bravo, Silent Key. Overbeck was co-inventor of the Quaggy antenna, which is part quad, part Yagi. He was active in amateur radio for over 68 years, was a communications law professor and textbook author, as well as an accomplished DXer and contester.
The ARRL Hudson Division is now on Discord. Discord is a great platform to connect and chat with like-minded peers. It is very simple to join the ARRL Hudson Division Discord. First, go to our website, hudson.arrl.org, and click on News and Discord. There you will find an invite link. Clicking on that will take you directly to Discord, where it will ask you to accept the invite. If you do not already have a Discord account, it will walk you through the setup process. Once in, you'll be able to stay up to date on what everyone is doing in the Hudson Division. Discord is available on phones and computers. Please remember to keep it clean and family-friendly, just like on the air. Clubs in our division like Whiskey 2, Whiskey Charlie Romeo, and Whiskey 2, Sierra Zulu are also on Discord. If you would like to set up a Discord server for your club, contact Adam Coble, Kilo Delta 2, Yankee Foxtrot Yankee, Whiskey 2, Whiskey Charlie Romeo, Club President.
You are listening to North America's premier news and information service for the amateur radio hobbyist. We are This Week in Amateur Radio.
It is time for this month's Volunteer Monitoring Report. The Volunteer Monitor Program is a joint initiative between ARRL and the FCC to enhance compliance in the amateur radio service. This is this month's activity report of the VM program. Commendations were issued to operators in Orange and Dana Point, California, for outstanding service on the Orange County Parks and Irvine Fire Watch Net on January 2nd, during the California wildfires. A commendation was issued to an operator in Washington for exceptional courtesy in the CW portion of 40 meters during crowded band conditions. A commendation was issued to a repeater operator in Wisconsin for exceptional efforts to instruct new repeater users about digital mobile radio technology. Technician operators in Alabama, New Jersey, and New York were reminded of the limitations of their licenses regarding FT8 and SSB operation on 40 and 20 meters. An operator in Florida was cautioned about the FCC rules limiting the advertising of items for sale. An operator in South Carolina was cautioned about transmitting broadcast news items on amateur frequencies. An operator in Delaware was reminded about the FCC rule concerning identification by call sign and the rule regarding proper bandwidth. There were 2 FCC meetings. 2 cases were referred by the FCC to the Volunteer Monitoring Program. Those cases were completed and returned to the FCC. The monitoring totals for this month's report were 1,498 hours on HF frequencies and 2,236 hours on VHF frequencies and above, for a total of 3,734 hours. We thank Volunteer Monitor Program Administrator Riley Hollingsworth, K4ZDH, for this report.
Emergency preparedness comes in many shapes. It can be an organized drill, a regularly scheduled net, or, as 3 hams in California recently found out, it can be as simple as leaving your 2-meter rig on and monitoring it. So here we have a tale of rescue following serious injury on a snow-encrusted soda summit. Greg Davidson, KF6CNS, recalls sitting in his garage with a friend in late March when a call for help came over on the 2-meter simplex calling frequency. Vincent Levique, KF6FLJ, had been hoping for a day of soda on Mount Williamson in the Angeles National Forest when his hike ended in a 150-foot slide down the hillside and a bone-breaking crash into a tree. Vincent had dropped his mobile phone. His emergency beacon had little power remaining, but he was able to call for help on his handy-talkie. Greg received that call 50 miles away thanks to a large commercial antenna at home. His immediate telephone outreach eventually led him to Will Richards, KJ6JJB, operations leader of the county sheriff's Montrose Search and Rescue. Will dispatched a helicopter and stayed on the phone with Greg, who was maintaining radio contact with Vincent. Pinning down the location's coordinates precisely posed a challenge for the helicopter, but Vincent was soon spotted, his bright orange windbreaker standing out against the snow. Vincent went on to say that he was airlifted to the nearest trauma center for surgery on his femur, and he is now recovering. He said Greg's attentiveness to the calling frequency that day may well have saved his life. Will quickly noted, however, that Vincent himself did some emergency preparedness too. The dashboard of his parked car held a map of his intended hiking route and another option to track him down. He said that both Vincent and Greg did everything right.
On May 1st, 2025, the first internet radio station dedicated to the service of amateur radio had its grand opening. The station can be heard 24/7 on W2PHradio.com and offers amateur radio programs, including This Week in Amateur Radio, the ARRL Weekly News, and live simulcasting of several HF traffic and ARES nets operating mornings across the state of Florida. The simulcasting provides for hurricane information for hams in storm-affected areas. The station also provides classic rock and oldies when not broadcasting amateur activities. The not-for-profit station is staffed entirely by hams, many of whom have professional broadcast backgrounds. W2PH Radio expects to include more ham-related programs for the amateur radio community. The station netcasts in 192 kilobit stereo with the latest in audio streaming equipment. The station is always looking for hams with previous broadcast experience to do shows and to contribute to the weekly schedule. Interested parties should contact the station manager, Ed Johnson, via email at ed@w2ph.com. That's ed at w2ph.com. The station's main studio is located on the Space Coast of Florida, with remote studios in Central and South Florida. And you can stop by and say hello to us at booths 3901 and 3902 at the upcoming Dayton Hamvention.
2 days after a reporter with the Voice of America asked the Irish Prime Minister about Gaza in front of the president, the White House ordered the National News Service off the air. The battle to get the 83-year-old national network back on the air is in its second month. A federal judge recently blocked the White House and its emissary to VOA, Kari Lake, from dismantling the service. Congress created the Voice of America in 1942 to counter Nazi propaganda. By law, the VOA did not broadcast inside the U.S. Instead, it was reaching an international audience of 360 million. In an executive order on March 14, the White House barred the news service staff from coming to work, although they still collect a paycheck. A 60-minute story took an in-depth look at the chain of events that triggered the order and the likely chilling effect on the day-to-day work of collecting and reporting the news at the VOA.
SpaceX called out rival EchoStar for allegedly failing to meet deployment requirements for radio spectrum in the 2 GHz band using novel evidence, a spectrum analysis performed by a Starlink satellite. The FCC assigned a portion of the spectrum known as AWS-4 to EchoStar, a subsidiary of Charlie Ergen's Dish Networks, to support both satellite communications and a ground-based 5G network. SpaceX told the FCC on April 14th that it used a Starlink satellite to measure the activity in EchoStar's frequency bands and that not much was happening. SpaceX says it analyzed 3 locations in Alaska, the northeast U.S., and the western U.S. But EchoStar pointed out that its requirement is to serve 70% of the U.S. population, and the company maintains it does do that, and the FCC certified as much in 2023. If SpaceX, intentionally or not, measured areas with low population density, both companies have a point. EchoStar is meeting its official requirement, but that threshold isn't a meaningful measure of spectrum usage. Why does SpaceX care? New Starlink users in the United States are being asked to pay congestion fees of up to $250 on top of the normal cost of the broadband service. That's a sign the Starlink network is reaching capacity in its most lucrative market, even as its international expansion is slowing. SpaceX has an interest in using EchoStar's radio real estate to gain more customers in the U.S. Where does this go from here? Accusations of spectrum squatting between competitors are nothing new, and this could simply be a novel way to make the argument. But Quilty's Kimberly Syverson Burke writes that if the Musk-friendly FCC were so inclined, it could use this evidence to justify revising the 2 GHz and Big LEO licensing framework to enable shared spectrum use that prioritizes next-gen systems like Starlink.
The Italian regulator has just given permission for radio amateurs to use the 40 MHz band, 8 meters, until the end of 2025. The approval is dated the 18th of April 2025 and is for a period of just over 8 months. This is just over double the previous period, which was from late August 2024 to the end of December 2024. For the remainder of 2025, Italian amateurs may operate with a maximum of 10 watts on 40.660 MHz to 40.700 MHz, 8 meters, the same range used for industrial, scientific, and medical purposes. This permission coincides with the peak of the sporadic E-season. Similar use was also granted for 70 to 70.400 MHz, 4 meters, and 1.810 to 1.830 MHz. The 8-meter band is expected to be the busiest of the 3.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available as an on-demand stream from Spotify, Deezer, and wherever podcasts are available.
Martin J. Marty Pittinger, KB3MXM, has resigned as Vice Director of the ARRL Atlantic Division effective April 28, 2025. Pittinger had been Vice Director since January 2023 when he was appointed to the role. He was elected in November 2023 to a 3-year term that began January 1, 2024. Pittinger previously served as Section Manager of the ARRL Maryland and Washington, D.C. section. ARRL President Rick Roderick, K5UR, will appoint a successor to serve the remainder of Pittinger's term, which expires in 2026. ARRL, the National Association for Amateur Radio, is governed by an all-volunteer board of directors. Elections are held for 5 of the 15 ARRL divisions each year for terms of 3 years.
Founded in 2024, the Staten Island Technical High School Amateur Radio League, callsign Whiskey Sierra 1 Tango Hotel Sierra, seeks to explore hands-on amateur radio applications in club and engineering classes. According to the club's QRZ page, they say their current strength is the promotion of ham radio to individuals that usually have no idea what it is and getting students licensed and learning. At last report, the club boasts 399 licensed students from the program. This includes 319 technician class, 62 general class, and 18 amateur extra licensees. The station trustee, Staten Island Technical High School teacher Everton Henriquez, Kilo Delta 2 Zulu Zulu Tango, has participated in 2 levels of the ARRL Teachers Institute and credits it for bringing a ton of great lessons, experiences, and collaborative friendships back home.
This has been a year for introspection in the world of communication. The International Amateur Radio Union is examining whether to restructure. In the U.S., the FCC is evaluating the full scope of its rules and regulations, and in the U.K., the BBC is looking at ways to rechart its course. With its charter set to expire in 2027, the BBC is using this year and next to examine its relationship with audiences across England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. BBC account holders have begun receiving questionnaires to complete online to let the broadcaster know how they see its future. Tim Davey, BBC Director General, said that the questionnaire, which takes about 10 minutes to complete, is the first of the BBC's 2-part research process to include later audience polling, and the results will contribute toward the BBC's charter review process. The BBC says in its written introduction to the questionnaire, "The BBC belongs to all of us. That's why it matters that we understand what you want the BBC to offer you and your family and the UK overall." It is planned to publish the findings from the questionnaire later this year.
There are just 14 remaining elements from the original 32-element Elford antenna that once worked its magic atop New York City's Empire State Building. When the antenna was decommissioned in 2019, some of the elements were offered free for the taking to interested parties. Now, however, the remaining elements are being put back to work for a cause. The Society of Broadcast Engineers New York City chapter is auctioning them off to raise money for the General Scholarship Fund of the Society's Enos Educational Foundation Trust. This is not your average vertical antenna. It is, in a way, the King Kong of antennas, even though the Elford didn't yet exist when the famous giant gorilla romanced the terrified actress Fay Wray in the classic 1933 film. This became the first master antenna system in the United States when it was installed in 1965. At one time, as many as 16 full-power FM stations used it, earning it the distinction of being the world's largest combined FM station system. The antenna was relegated to auxiliary status in 1990, and by 2017 it was no longer needed as new antennas were installed. Bidding, which ended on April 30th, started at $300 per element. It remains to be seen whether, like King Kong, those bids ascended to impressive heights. Winners will be asked to take delivery in New Jersey at ground floor level.
Hello and welcome to the DX Corner for your weekly dose of DX as part of Ham Radio's oldest ham radio magazine on the air, This Week in Amateur Radio.
I'm Bill, AJ8B. Congratulations to my friend and one of my mentors, Dave, K8DV. Dave earned the 60-meter DXCC award with hard work and patience. Congratulations to Dave. If you didn't know there was a 60-meter DXCC award, drop me a note. It's not sponsored by the ARL, but by the 60-meter online federation. So shoot me an email at thedxmentor@gmail.com, and I can get you details. Also, if I may, I wanted to mention that I finally earned WAZ-CW. I was able to get Zone 24 on CW when I logged BI4 KVT last week. It takes time and effort, but it's well worth it. Let me know what you've earned, and I'll get it on the air. Each week, I'm trying to focus on those entities that will be available in the next 7 days. There's so much data to sift through that I thought a focus on the next week might be helpful. So here's what should be coming on in the next 7 days. The following DX information comes from Bernie, W3UR, editor of the Daily DX, the Weekly DX, and the How's DX column in QST. If you would like a free 2-week trial of the Daily DX, your only source of real-time DX information, just drop me a note at thedxmentor@gmail.com and I'll get you hooked up. Zulu Sierra 8 Whiskey, Eurus, continues to hand out the QSOs from Prince Edward and Marion Islands. After 3 days of operating, he had 7,241 QSOs in the log. Eurus is currently focusing on FT8 95% of the time based on the results in Club Log. My friend, 88FD Brian, was one of the first to get him in the log, maybe one of the first 10. Brian said, quote, right place at the right time, end quote. Congratulations to Brian and all the other hams who have worked ZS8W for an all-time new one. I'm still trying to get them. Of course, I'll let you know next week. I have this update from the Austral Islands, Fox Ocean/Alpha. DK8ZZ reports that the TX9A team is, quote, still ready for new challenges. During one of the most recent operating shifts, they had good 6-meter activity from Central America and Brazil, plus a slight opening to North America. They got 80 Europeans on 80 meters and planned more 80-meter activity before their sunrise each day. With rain in the forecast for the next few days, they think that could cause some QRN. The log was updated on Club Log with 9,000 dupes, and the log will be sorted out when the operation is over, and OQRS will be activated then as well. To celebrate the 80 years since the end of World War II in Europe, TM45END will be QRV from France until May 31st, QSL to F5JYD, and I love these commemorative QSL cards and stations. And speaking of which, the Northwest Group, MN0NWG from Northern Ireland, will be QRV with a special call sign GB0 Alpha Echo Lima until May 31st. They are commemorating Amelia Earhart's transatlantic flight. It was May 20th to the 21st, 1932, that Earhart was the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic nonstop. She flew from Harbour Grace, Newfoundland, Canada, 15 hours, to Londonderry, Northern Ireland. QSL to MI0HOZ direct or via the Bureau. The Guernsey Group will be QRV until May 14th using Golf Uniform 6 Echo Fox Whiskey. They plan 160 through 6 meters sideband CW in digital and will try the QO100 satellite and 2.3 gigahertz EME. That's pretty exciting stuff. So that'll be worth chasing those guys down. Until May 10th, Kazakhstani amateur radio operators will conduct a commemorative activity marking the 80th anniversary of the victory in World War II and recognizing the Republic's contribution to the fight against Nazism. So not only is that always a historically interesting commemorative kind of a station, but if you need band slots with Kazakhstan, that would be the great time to fill them. The D-84 Charlie team is going to Chuji Island, Korea, for an operation until May 6th. There will be 4 ops with ICOM radios, a 7610, a 7300, and 2 756 Pro 3s, plus IC2KL and an ICPW1 amplifier. For antennas, it's a K4KO hex beam, a homebrew hex beam, and a Cushcraft R7 vertical. They will be doing CW, FT8, RTTY, and sideband, so check that out. MDXC will conduct their next de-expedition to Bioko Island, Equatorial Guinea, October 30th to November 10th. A team of 14 operators will use the call sign 3 Charlie 2 Mike Delta and operate 160 through 6 meters, all modes. Specialists will activate EME and QO100 from this DXCC entity for the first time. Equatorial Guinea ranks 127th on Club Log's most wanted DXCC list, but is semi-rare on human modes, ranking 66 on CW and 43 on sideband. QSL via IK2 VUC, and I'll have more details later. The most recent DX Mentor podcast episode is available this weekend. Dan, KB6NU, was the guest. Dan talked about his blog, his mission statement, and all of his training materials that he has developed, as well as the successful classes he's given. He's a phenomenal teacher and has absolutely great results from the way he handles classes. You should give it a listen. If you're interested in DX Podcast or YouTube DX channels, you should check out the DX Mentor Facebook page and subscribe to be kept up to date on all of the DX activities. Please send me an email if you need any details on any of the things we talked about, and that would be thedxmentor@gmail.com. Until next week, this is Bill, AJB saying 7-3, and thanks to my XYL Karen for her love and support. I hope to hear you in the pileups. Have a great DX week.
Keeping the amateur radio community around the world informed, you are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio. Available worldwide as a podcast from our web at twiar.net.
Foundations of Amateur Radio. A recent comment by a fellow amateur sparked a train of thought that made me wonder why there is a pervasive idea within our community that you need a radio transmitter and antenna to be a radio amateur. Moreover, that for some reason if you don't have either, you're not a real amateur. I suppose it's related to the often repeated trope that the internet-enabled modes like All-Star-Link, Echo-Link and even IRLP are not real radio, despite evidence to the contrary. Instead of fighting this weird notion, I figured I'd get on with it and find a way to play, even if you don't currently have the ability to erect an antenna or key a transmitter for whatever reason. Before I dig in, a WebSDR is a software-defined radio connected to the internet. It allows a user to open a web browser, pick from a massive collection of receivers around the world and listen in. Some of these also have the ability to transmit, but more on that later. Here's the idea. Have you ever considered tuning to a WebSDR, using it to pick a signal, and using your computer to decode that signal? I'm aware that some sites provide a range of inbuilt decoders, but that doesn't cover the wide spectrum of modes that amateur radio represents, let alone the modes that are not specific to our hobby. As I've said previously, many of the modes in use today are essentially the width of an audio stream. This means that if you tune a WebSDR to a frequency, the audio comes out of your computer speakers. If that's voice, your job is done and you can hear what's going on. If it's something else, then you're going to have to find a way to decode this to get the message. So if you send the audio from your web browser into something like FLDG or WSJTX, you'll be able to decode the signal if it's supported by those tools. This is true for all the other tools too, Morse, RTTY, you name it. Depending on which operating system you're using, the way to implement this will differ. Starting with a search for WebSDR and WSJTX will get you on your way. You might ask why I'm advocating WSJTX even though it only supports a small set of modes. And that's a fair question. In my experience, it's the simplest to get running and get results. 2 tips. Make sure you set your configuration to indicate that you don't have a radio, otherwise it's going to attempt to control something that isn't there, and make sure that your computer clock is set accurately using NTP or Network Time Protocol. You can thank me later. Now, I hinted earlier at transmitting. There's a growing range of places where your amateur license will give you access to a station somewhere on the internet, and with that the ability to get on air and make noise. An increasing number of radio amateur clubs are building remote stations for their members to enjoy. There are also individuals and small groups doing the same independently. A few organisations are offering this as a service to paid subscribers. These tools often implement a remote desktop session where you connect to a computer that in turn is connected to a radio. The supported modes depend on what is installed at the other end. Others implement a slightly different method where you run specialized software locally, sometimes inside a web browser, that connects to a server across the internet. allowing you to run whatever digital mode you want on your own computer. I'll point out that even if you start with receiving digital modes using a web SDR, you can expand that into transmitting at a later stage. So, no antenna, no transmitter, no problem. Still an amateur. I'm Ono, Victor Kilo 6, Foxtrot Lima Alpha Bravo.
Bruce Page, KK5DO, is here now with this week's AMSAT report. Bruce?
Thanks, John. I mentioned the ARRL Field Day a bit ago. However, it is never too early to start preparing. In fact, there are some clubs that start preparing right after the end of Field Day for the next year. I had previously discussed AMSAT Field Day. For those interested in satellites, this is a really fun time. It seems the new Tevel 2 satellites are not commissioned. Hopefully this will happen by Field Day, as they will give us 9 more satellites. There are still plenty of satellites operational. For the complete AMSAT Field Day rules, visit amsat.org, click on Events, and then click on AMSAT Field Day on the satellites. Mark N8 TLV will be operating as VY0SAT in grid EP28 from April 30th at 1840 UTC through May 3rd, 1945 UTC. This is a great time to catch a new grid. This is Bruce Page, KK5DO. Back to you, John.
And thanks, Bruce, for that report.
It is time for this week's propagation and solar weather report. On May 2nd, spaceweather.com reported that astronomers are monitoring a very large sunspot now turning toward Earth. Sunspot AR 4079 stretches more than 140,000 kilometers from end to end and has 2 dark cores, each large enough to swallow Earth. Moreover, it is surrounded by a ring of Ellerman bombs. Ellerman bombs are a sign of magnetic complexity in a sunspot. Opposite polarities bump together, reconnect, and boom. A full-fledged flare may not be far behind. Solar activity increased to moderate levels this past week. The largest flare was on April 30th from an area where there was a major M-class flare producer on its previous rotation last week. No Earth-directed coronal mass ejections were observed. Solar activity is expected to be low with a chance for M-class flares, which are minor to moderate in level, and a slight chance for X-class flares, which are categorized at the strong level, through May 2nd. Radio blackouts reaching the R1 levels were observed over the past 24 hours. The largest was on April 30th. The 10.7 centimeter flux for the near term will be 140 on May 1st through the 4th, then 150 on May 5th, 160 on May 6th and 7th, and then 165 on May 8th. Predicted sunspot numbers for the near term will be 132 on May 3rd, and 125 on May 4th. For more information concerning radio propagation, visit the ARRL Technical Information Service, read a quick guide to HF propagation using solar indices, and check out the propagation page of Karl Lewetzelschwab, K9LA. For customizable propagation charts, visit the VOCAP Online for Ham Radio website.
Just ahead in Radio Sport, more great contests. May 3rd through the 4th, there are 6 contests for you. The 1010 International Spring Contest, that's CW. The Microwave Spring Sprint, CW Phone and Digital. The 7th Call Area QSO Party, CW Phone and Digital. The Indiana QSO Party, CW Phone. The Delaware QSO Party, CW Phone and Digital. And also May 3rd and 4th, the New England QSO Party, CW Phone and Digital. May 5th, the K1USN Slow Speed Test, that's CW. On May 6th, the ICWC Medium Speed Test, CW there as well. May 7th, the A1 Club AWT CW Contest. May 9th, the Weekly RTTY Test, RTTY of course there. May 10th and the 11th, there are 4 contests for you. The CQM International DX Contest, CW and Phone. The SKCC Weekend Sprintathon, CW. Also on May 10th through the 11th, the 50 MHz Spring Sprint, CW Phone and Digital. And on May 13th, the DARC FT4 contest, that is, of course, FT4. And remember to visit the ARRL contest calendar for more events and information. Upcoming section, state, and division conventions on May 4th, the Warminster Amateur Radio Club Annual Hamfest, hosting the ARRL Eastern Pennsylvania Section Convention. That's in Bristol, Pennsylvania. On May 10th, the Lincoln Amateur Radio Club hosting the ARRL Nebraska State Convention. That's in Lincoln, Nebraska. And May 16th through the 18th, the Dayton Hamvention in Xenia, Ohio. And don't forget to search the ARRL Hamfest and Convention database to find events in your area.
The 16th Annual Tucson Amateur Packet Radio and AMSAT Banquet will be held at the Kohler Presidential Banquet Center on Friday, May 16th at 18:30 Eastern Daylight Time. This dinner is always a highlight of the TAPR and AMSAT activities during the Dayton Hamvention. This year's banquet speaker will be Phil Karn, Kilo Alpha 9, Quebec, who will highlight developments and use cases for his Kilo Alpha 9 Quebec radio software suite. The Kohler Presidential Banquet Center is located at 4548 Presidential Way, Kettering, Ohio, about 20 minutes away from the Greene County Fairgrounds. Tickets may be purchased from the AMSAT store online. The banquet ticket purchase deadline is Monday, May 12th at 1700 Eastern Daylight Time or 2100 UTC. Banquet tickets must be purchased in advance and will not be sold at the AMSAT booth. There will be no tickets to pick up at the AMSAT booth. Tickets purchased online will be maintained on a list with check-in at the door at the banquet center. Seating is limited to the number of meals reserved with the Kohler caterers based on the number of tickets sold by the deadline.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available to download as a podcast from anywhere on the web podcasts are available.
ARRL welcomes members and all radio amateurs to visit us at the 2025 Dayton Hamvention being held May 16th through the 18th in Xenia, Ohio. John Ross, KD8IDJ, is here to tell us more in this report from League headquarters.
The event features 3 days of fun activities, ham radio programming, and plenty of opportunities to engage with ARRL. Saturday's ARRL Youth Rally will be a fun day of ham radio discovery and friendship for young people aged 11 to 21. Among the teams leading the youth rally will be volunteers from the ARRL Collegiate Amateur Radio Program, CARP, who are also exhibiting and presenting at Hamvention. In addition to the CARP Forum, ARRL has many other exciting forums planned at Hamvention. Start off Friday with a Surfside lesson on portable antennas with Salty Walt Hudson, K4OGO, of the popular Coastal Waves and Wires YouTube channel. Salty Walt's forum is Friday 10:15 a.m. until 11:15 a.m. in Room 3. The ARRL membership forum is on Saturday, and there are many other great ARRL forums for you to attend, and you can see the whole list at www.arrl.org/expo. You can also visit ARRL's large exhibit area in the Tesla building. All great things that you expect from ARRL will be there, including the chance to get some ARRL merchandise and publications. Get your free 2025 ARRL button. The ARRL VEC will be on site to help hams renew their license, and you can visit with ARRL leaders face-to-face and learn about how to get involved in your local ham community and much more. You asked and we listened. The ever-popular on-site radio emissions testing by the ARRL lab returns this year. Have your handheld tested to make sure the output is clean. Expert engineers will be on hand to do it right in front of you. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
You can also see the ARRL Sweepstakes ICOM Dream Station on display. You can find ticket information at www.hamvention.org. Download the ARRL Program Guide PDF, which includes a map of the ARRL exhibit area. We look forward to seeing you in Dayton.
100 years ago, in April 1925, ARRL founder Hiram Percy Maxim traveled to Paris to form the International Amateur Radio Union. Maxim served as IARU's first president, and ARRL serves as the International Secretariat. 100 years later, IARU delegates gathered again in the city on April 26, 2025, to honor the centennial. ARRL President Rick Roderick, K5UR, ARRL CEO David Minster, NA2AA, and ARRL International Affairs Vice President Rod Stafford, W6ROD, participated in the event, representing the International Secretariat.
You are invited to experience the fascinating world of amateur radio in Friedrichshafen, Germany on Lake Constance from June 27th to the 29th, 2025. Europe's most important trade fair for radio amateurs, entitled Ham Radio, will be held for the 48th time. The weekend of June 27th will be devoted to the usual in-person contacts between old friends, with plenty of workshops, seminars, and new product displays in the mix of activities. The motto for this year's exhibition in Germany, however, is all about not being there. The theme of remote radio, connecting the world, focuses on how radio operators are no longer required to be in the same place as their equipment in order to transmit successfully. This kind of remote operation has already been demonstrated in a number of high-profile de-expeditions using RIBs, or a radio in a box. These stations are controlled remotely over the internet, opening up more opportunities for those who wish to experiment and allowing the expeditions to take place in environmentally sensitive areas where human presence is forbidden or restricted. Last year's event on Lake Constance attracted more than 11,300 attendees from 58 nations. You can immerse yourself in a world full of unlimited possibilities and discover the latest trends and technologies in amateur radio. In addition, our partner and conceptual sponsor for the trade fair this year is the German Amateur Radio Club, and it is celebrating its 75th anniversary this year. Messe Friedrichshafen would like to congratulate them on 3/4 of a century of full commitment to amateur radio. Remote stations are of critical importance to the DARC as they not only extend the range and accessibility of amateur radio, but also provide a platform for sharing knowledge, driving forward technical innovations, and ensuring reliable communications in a time of crisis. Last year, the DARC set up Project Remote, which is currently entering the nationwide test phase with an online portal. The official launch will take place at Ham Radio 2025, where visitors can get a first impression of the participating stations and find out more about the future of the DARC project. Book your online ticket now for Ham Radio 2025 today at its special price and join in the celebrations. Meanwhile, going over to Belgium, the HamConB Amateur Radio Conference will take place in Belgium on April 26, 2025. That's coming up shortly. Attendees can expect programming to focus on radio technology in space, and workshops. The HamConB 2025 conference is Belgium's premier forum for engineers, scientists, radio amateurs, researchers, and students to exchange ideas on advancements in radio technology and beyond. Admission to the conference is free, but registration is mandatory. Presentation topics include Mesh-tastic, beacons, radio sport, tracking Asian hornets with SDR, and a whole lot more. We'll see you at HamConB 2025 in Belgium.
The 24-hour International Amateur Radio Union HF World Championship begins at 1200 UTC on Saturday, July 12, and ends at 11:59 UTC on Sunday, July 13. This annual contest supports amateur self-training in radio communications, improving operating skills, and conducting technical investigations and intercommunicating with other amateurs around the world using the 160, 80, 40, 20, 15, and 10-meter bands. Ken Yamamoto, JA1CJP Secretary, IARU Region 3, in an email passed to us by WIA Secretary Peter Klee, reminds us here at the WIA that in this contest multipliers are the total number of ITO zones plus IARU member society HQ stations worked on each band, not mode. Thus, society's HQ stations' participation is very important for the multipliers.
In Florida, a low-power FM station has been issued a notice of violation from the FCC for not being so low power. Florida low-power FM station WZPP has been charged with boosting its licensed 100-watt signal on 96.1 FM. According to an FCC notice of violation made public in late April, the station known as the Voice of the Caribbean was operating at 811% of its authorized power when field agents from the Enforcement Bureau measured its signal strength in May of 2024. The station has been on the air since 2014, featuring sports, news, music, and commentary that serves the Caribbean American community. The non-commercial station, which is operated by the Broward Jewish Alliance, has been told to respond to the FCC within 20 days of the notice's release date.
The 2025 Dayton Hamvention will be held at Greene County Fairgrounds in Xenia, Ohio on May 16th through the 18th, 2025. AMSAT will have our usual robust presence and after-hours activities. AMSAT is one of the largest exhibitors at Hamvention, occupying booths 1007 through 1010 and 1107 through 1110 in Building 1. AMSAT is actively seeking volunteers to assist with booth activities and invites enthusiasts to dedicate their time. Last year, around 20 volunteers played crucial roles in fostering meaningful interactions with attendees. Volunteers, whether able to commit a few hours or the entire weekend, are warmly encouraged to participate. For those eager to be part of AMSAT's presence at Dayton Hamvention or request more information about volunteering, contact Phil Smith, Whiskey 1 Echo Mike Echo, AMSAT Hamvention Team Leader. To volunteer or inquire further, individuals can reach out to Phil via email at Whiskey 1 Echo Mike Echo at astrocom.net. Your involvement not only enriches the event, but also contributes to the vibrant amateur radio community.
We pause for stations along the network to identify. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, available as a direct download on our website at www.twiar.net.
Welcome to the 37th segment of Ham Radio History, a century of amateur radio. Ham's organizations, events, inventions. I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR. Our appreciation goes out to Chris Cadella, W2PA, for allowing us to use his website in the production of these segments. Now, relax and enjoy this chapter of Ham Radio History. What is an amateur? As the number of phone broadcasts exploded in late 1921, radio amateurs and the ARRL were ambivalent about it. On one hand, the great increase in the number of people owning receivers was a good thing. Radio technology was being embraced by the general public. On the other hand, the shared airwaves were getting even more crowded. There were now thousands of broadcast stations operating, both commercial and amateur. Furthermore, a fuzzy line separated amateur from non-amateur that had nothing to do with commercial interest. The days when owning a wireless receiver made you a hobbyist were coming to an end, as the people slowly began to appreciate radio for its message, not just its medium. Operating a transmitter, on the other hand, made you more than a mere listener. And if you transmitted not for two-way communication, but to no one in particular, never listening for a reply, you were also a broadcaster. In December, QST began a new department called With the Radiophone Folks to present on-air schedules of the better class of broadcasting stations for the growing group of those interested primarily in receiving them. ARRL Secretary Kenneth Warner's editorial asked whether phone was a wonderful thing or infernal nuisance, concluding that it was basically wonderful, and we look forward to that day when every home will have its radio installation, when powerful central stations will broadcast news, concerts, lectures, entertainments, and everyone may get them without stirring from his living room. Although there were some good quality amateur broadcasts, it was the amateur concert fiends who were a problem, he wrote. They were determined to transmit in spite of the awfulness of the modulation, the ungodly supply ripple, the travesty on music which his alleged phonograph grinds out. In an effort to bring some order to the environment, the Commerce Department amended its regulations in January to require a limited commercial license for all broadcasting stations and forbid amateurs from broadcasting altogether. Transmitting, of course, was still fine. With broadcasters limited to 360 meters, 845 meters for crop and weather information, there should not be an interference problem with amateurs down at 200. But it was not quite so simple. Some amateurs continued to stray above 200 meters, and many of the receivers being sold to the public were inefficient and unselective, yet quite expensive. When people who were not amateurs had their listening pleasure interrupted by interference from telegraphy stations, it was naturally the amateurs who were blamed and complained about, not their expensive new receivers. Much of the time, it was not amateurs they were hearing at all, but commercial telegraph stations. Phone had proved unsuitable for relay work and would never really be useful for it, reasoned Warner, since the range was so much greater if a phone set were used on CW. Still, it increasingly drew enthusiasts among the amateurs for other technical and operational reasons. QST technical editor Robert S. Cruz, who in an article about QRM the previous summer had written that the telephone is inherently broad tuning and for that reason, to me, an obnoxious perversion of the CW set, now appealed for cooperation. Despite the success of the Chicago plan and cooperative operating in general, a tension was developing between phone operators and code operators, similar to the tension between those involved in local and DX operation and those using Spark and CW. The phone enthusiasts sometimes saw the code operator as an ignorant brass pounder without technical ability, and the code expert viewed the phone operator as a ham, punk, or lid who often violates the recognized courtesies of the ether, reported Cruz. He believed the two camps had much to learn from each other, and they should talk, get a mutual understanding, and work together to establish reasonable time division on the air, as amateurs had always done in the past. Cruz criticized the tone, meaning the quality of modulation, of the majority of phone transmitters, and cited only two that he considered any good, KDKA, formerly 8XK, and 3NR. There was not yet much of a distinction between commercial and amateur where broadcasting was concerned, despite the additional license requirement. Amusingly, he also complained that phone stations would often continue to send out a signal even during periods when no talking was going on or music was being played while the phonograph is being wound. On the positive side, a high percentage of a phone station's hearers are interested listeners, he wrote. By this, Cruz meant that while a code station's transmissions were normally meant for one recipient, a phone broadcast was meant for many. But he also drew a distinction between what he called a conversation phone and a broadcast phone in this regard. He would not be surprised if KDKA's audiences are larger than those of NAA, the Navy's time and weather station. Westinghouse was probably not surprised either, selling receivers as fast as they could make them. Crowded airwaves, broad tuning, wide signals, time sharing, all of it cried out for a different way of thinking about radio. Yet, almost everyone still considered up the only rational direction to go in wavelength, despite getting even closer to zero in frequency. Amidst all the debate, there were a few voices among the amateurs, the ones condemned to life in the worthless wasteland below 200 meters, who began to think in the other direction. Dakota Division Manager Boyd Phelps, 9ZT, reminded QST readers that an infinite number of wavelengths existed below 200 meters, largely ignored by amateurs, and offered some technical guidelines on how one might get there, including using antennas at their harmonic wavelengths. The tuning, as he correctly pointed out, was much sharper at lower wavelengths, offering a promise of greatly reduced QRM. Until amateurs got down there, cooperation continued to be the only way to avoid on-air confrontation and the threat of further restrictive regulation. The ARRL created a publicity department to get information about amateur radio out to the public, an easy task in a day when radio itself was one of the biggest news stories. Listeners were also invited to attend affiliated club meetings, both to learn and to complain about interference. In some areas of the country, Amateurs even adopted volunteer quiet periods in the evening during broadcast hours. While it all seemed to be working for the moment, it was increasingly clear that the 1912 radio law was in need of major revision. The Secretary of Commerce was to appoint a committee to devise a new code of radio laws, particularly to take into account the new situation brought about by the advent of the phone, according to QST. ARRL fully expected to participate in this, and in a lengthy 5-page editorial, Warner solicited views and comments from individual amateurs and clubs. The two most prominent issues were regulation of amateur broadcasts and the interference problem between amateur transmission and commercial broadcast reception, he wrote. Since the assigning of two wavelengths, 360 and 485 meters, to commercial broadcasts, all amateur phone broadcasts had been prohibited, temporarily according to Warner, by the January amendment to the regulations. While corporations had an interest in regulating amateurs, the primary reason for the prohibition was to protect the radio telegraph operators, whom the department recognizes as the great national asset, being swamped by the amateur phones. With the tremendous growth in broadcasting, there also was a need to regulate the quality of signals and types of broadcasts, taking into account the interests of the general public. Local amateur phone conversation was not the problem. It was the broadcasts that interfered with the large number of telegraph stations on 200 meters. Nevertheless, the Commerce Department was our friend, wrote Warner, and hams must work to enable amateur broadcasts, where such service is desirable, perhaps on some other wavelength, such as 175 or 225 meters. A quick break for identification purposes. You're listening to This Week in Amateur Radio. Another suggestion was a graded licensing system that would restrict, for example, first-year stations to operating below 175 meters, phones on 200, Spark on 225, and CW on 275, edging upwards again the natural direction for the most DX-worthy mode. In the various band segmentation proposals, the common scheme was to have phone transmissions on shorter wavelengths and CW on the longer end, setting a pattern for many band plans yet to come. Warner appealed for calm consideration in all possibilities. Everyone assumed amateur broadcasting would return. Another difficulty was the accelerating development of commercial broadcasting. Corporations did it all. They built large broadcasting stations, arranged for programming, advertised their service, and sold receivers. This had created a huge change during just the past year. Receiver manufacturers could not keep up with the demand, and, in the biggest change from what had existed before, the broadcasting companies are making big business out of what was the game of us amateurs for so many years, complained Warner, adding, "It's Mr. Novice who is doing the buying," referring to members of the listening public. These buyers did not really care about radio itself, he wrote, only about having something they could listen to. More than novices, however, many were also people in prominent roles in society, government officials, corporate officers, doctors, educators. When people like that heard signals that confused them and interfered with what they wanted to hear, it became a problem for amateurs because they were the ones who normally got blamed, even for static. Believing that concerts, news, and other broadcast content was all there was to radio, typical listeners had no knowledge of other services including amateur radio and were completely unaware of the various constraints on spectrum use. Prominent people who were part of the radio boom could, as a result, end up causing or promoting overregulation. Finally, there was a reality that amateur wavelengths were just too close to commercial broadcast wavelengths. One proposal, objected to by various interests, was to raise the broadcasters up to 1,000 to 1,800 meters, which, it claimed, was largely unused space reserved by the Navy. There was no room for expansion lower with all the broadcasters on 360 meters. Another somewhat naive suggestion was to do what amateurs had always done: embrace newcomers, invite them to club meetings, show them what hams do. The fatal flaw in this suggestion lay in the fact, acknowledged earlier, that the newcomers really had no interest in radio itself the way amateurs did. It was the difference between a practitioner and a user, the medium and the message. In an example of the regulatory threat, the ARRL was asked, by whom was not identified, what hams would think of a proposal to ban amateur operation between 8 and 11 p.m. The rationale was, since the ARRL was primarily interested in distance work, which is not really possible until late at night anyway, this limitation should be acceptable. Moreover, some amateurs who were also broadcast listeners seemed ready to support such a measure. Warner's long editorial concluded that the preference of each local area majority should decide how to handle spectrum conflicts, again relying on all radio users to know each other and agree to cooperate, something that had worked well in the past. While appreciating the threat, the editors and the league did not yet seem to grasp the magnitude of the radio boom, having only witnessed the beginning thus far. Still, they feared that in an either-or fight, the broadcast listener might get everything. Listeners were rapidly outnumbering amateurs, and there was no end in sight. Ironically, amateurs now faced a similar problem with broadcast listeners that commercial and government stations had faced in the early days with amateurs, who had far outnumbered them. The ARRL called on clubs to immediately organize local meetings that would include everyone, hams and listeners alike, to talk over the issues. Then they should try to come to an understanding. Whether it would be quiet hours or not, it should be decided by majority agreement. We must make up our minds that the old days of free-for-all amateur radio have gone for good. The day will never return when we can make all the noise we want at any old time of the day or night, he noted. Even in the glow of the transatlantic test triumph, he did not yet see the new radio landscape yet to be discovered. Commerce Secretary Herbert Hoover announced in January 1922 that a new Department of Commerce Cup, later to be referred to as the Hoover Cup, would be awarded annually for work during a calendar year under the auspices of the ARRL to America's best all-around amateur station, the major portion of which is homemade, satisfying 9 criteria and adhering to a list of regulations. Entries for 1921 would be due by March 1st. Besides the excitement over such an offer by the government, QST expressed pride that the award had been offered to ARRL for administration, and Warner noticed 2 things about it that he thought were especially pleasant. Hoover himself was an engineer, and so were amateurs in a sense. Radio demands innovation. Secondly, the Secretary had been in control of amateur radio, and under the department's guidance it had grown, making possible its contributions to the nation and the war effort. On a unanimous vote of the ARRL board, the first Hoover Cup went to Louis Falcone, 5ZA of Roswell, New Mexico. July QST carried a nearly 6-page description of his home-built station, written by the winner. Included in this material are quotes from the following: Clinton B. DeSoto, 200 meters and down, the American Radio Relay League Incorporated, 1936, page 75. Robert S. Cruz, CWQRM, Radio Communications by the Amateurs, QST, July 1921, page 57. Robert S. Cruz, The Radiophone and the Code Station, An Argument for Cooperation, QST, March 1922, page 21. Boyd Phelps, 9ZT, Radio Below 200 Meters, QST, March 1922, page 24. The Phones in Amateur Radio, Editorial, QST, March 1922, page 29. The Department of Commerce Cup, QST, January 1922, page 20. The Herbert Hoover Cup, editorial, January 1922, page 25. 5ZA gets Hoover Cup for 1921, QST, July 1922, page 19. With thanks to Chris Cadella, W2PA, for permission to use his website's materials, Ham Radio History, A Century of Amateur Radio, Ham's Organizations, Events, Inventions, to prepare this chapter, I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR, reporting for This Week in Amateur Radio.
We pause for stations along the network to identify. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, available as a stream to your favorite digital device on Spotify, TuneIn.com, Overcast, iHeartMedia, and wherever you download your podcasts.
The Parks on the Air Jedi Council, also known as the Pottstown Area Amateur Radio Club, will be convening in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania on Sunday, May 4th, 2025, to set up a multi-mode Parks on the Air demonstration with characters paying homage to the Star Wars universe. Wayne Skavinsky, Kilo Bravo 3 Sierra Bravo Charlie, the Sith Lord of QRP, a veteran POTA operator and organizer of the special event, will lead his band of experienced amateurs in showing visitors how POTA can be done, including what kind of equipment you'll need to get started. We want to share our experience so that other people can get a head start and learn from us, so they don't make the same mistakes we made in the beginning, Stravinsky explained. Believe me, we all know going out for the first time can be a nerve-wracking experience, end quote. Parks on the Air Jedi Council activation begins at 8 o'clock a.m. Eastern Daylight Time on Sunday, May 4th, and will run until about noon. Each of the operators will be on the air for about an hour solo, so as not to interfere with each other in the confined signal landing and takeoff zone. Visitors can witness each of the operators using multiple modes, single sideband, CW, and FT8 to make contacts. More than 200 contacts are expected. Other Jedi personnel participating will be Dr. Bill Hewitt, Whiskey 3 Fox Romeo Bravo, Boba Fettina Master, who makes his own antennas, Greg Malone, Whiskey Alpha 3 Golf Mike, DeLorean CW operator, Joel Rubicam, November Fox 3 Romeo, CQ3PO will operate single sideband and FT8, and Pete Kobach, Kilo 0 Bravo Alpha Kilo, Rove 1, will explain how to do a rover activation. The operators will be ready to answer questions about the gear and antennas, and how to make and log contacts. And just maybe future amateur radio Jedis will get the chance to make a contact as well. The event will take place rain or shine, and refreshments will be served at the POTA Jedi Council event. The theme is appropriate for the day. May the 4th be with you.
As the AMSAT engineering team prepares to build an engineering prototype of its Golf 3U CubeSat with deployable solar panels, its mechanical engineers could use a bit of help creating drawings for the satellite solar panels, antennas, and associated small parts. You will work directly with the engineer who created the parts. When asked to make a drawing, the engineer will provide you with the AutoCAD inventor file of the part, plus the assembly model where the part is used. From the assembly model, you can learn the function of the assembly and the role of the part in the assembly. This information will help you determine how to dimension the part and choose tolerances so that it is machined properly. Also, the engineer will provide written instructions for guidance and be available to answer questions. If you have some spare time to create about 20 drawings, each consisting of a latch, spring, bushing, structural post, antenna mount, PCBs, etc., AMSAT engineers could use your help to stay on schedule. The time estimate that a drawing might require is 1 to 3 hours of time. Their modeling software is AutoCAD Inventor. They can provide access to an Inventor license if you need it. For more information, please send your email with a short description of your experience to volunteer@amsat.org.
For years, the K-12 education team at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory worked to get students to see themselves. Now teachers lament how to fill the gap. The team made hundreds of lesson plans around major space events. They facilitated workshops for teachers, created a high school internship, took meteor rocks to local campuses, and much, much more. All of these activities were meant to foster the next generation of STEM professionals. In 2018, JPL's K-12 education team was part of a group that won an Emmy for its coverage of the Cassini mission's grand finale at Saturn. But during the last round of layoffs at JPL, the tiny team was among the 325 let go. And though some parts of the educational program remain, educators across the country mourn what was lost. The program was for teachers, by teachers. 3 of the K-12 education team's 4 members are former classroom teachers. That experience helped them know what to do and what not to do to make their materials useful. We wanted to make sure that teachers didn't have to figure out how to get our stuff in, said Oda Lutz, former manager for STEM elementary and secondary education and a former math teacher. The education team served as a pipeline, taking the missions, discoveries, and engineering innovations that happened at JPL and turning them into resources for teachers. The team's efforts proved fruitful. The JPL education website drove about 30% of the research center's annual web traffic, to the tune of about a little over 2 million visits annually, Lutz said.
ARRL ham radio open house events across North America have increased public awareness and engagement with amateur radio during April, which is also Citizen Science Month. John Ross, KD8IDJ, is here with the rest of the story.
Centered around World Amateur Radio Day on April 18th, ARRL ham radio open house events were held in at least 57 locations. Several more are scheduled for this upcoming weekend. In Vienna, West Virginia, the Parkersburg Amateur Radio Club, W8PAR, set up its open house in a shopping mall, garnering many impressions in foot traffic and even more in the local news. The Marietta Times newspaper and WTAP-TV both did stories on their activation. In Yaphank, New York, on Long Island, an event held by the Suffolk County Radio Club was featured in Newsday. Reporter Joe Workmeister profiled the club's event that drew out a crowd of visitors. ARRL Hudson Division Director Ed Wilson, W2XDD, who serves as vice president of the club, was quoted in that story. ARRL Public Relations and Outreach Manager Sierra Harrop, W5DX, says the media exposure is invaluable. News coverage, especially once the stories are shared on social media, multiplies the message in ways we couldn't even begin to. The ARRL's media monitoring tool tells us that 1.32 million people were reached with the coverage from Long Island alone. All that media placement was earned by ARRL volunteers telling the story of ham radio, she said. Many of the clubs which participated have told ARRL they intend to make the open houses a yearly event. Harrop hopes the clubs can build on the momentum of that success. ARRL Ham Radio Open House was a great introduction for people to what radio amateurs do. Let's keep those new folks engaged in the clubs, make them feel welcome in the community, then get them licensed and have them take part in 2025 ARRL Field Day. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
Clubs that participated in ARRL Ham Radio Open House will be asked to submit visitor counts to show how many people were reached in person. HamSci and SciStarter, which worked with ARRL to develop and promote the event, are working to track the encounters as part of 1 Million Acts of Science, SciStarter's nationwide program for Citizen Science Month.
A reminder that the annual Armed Forces Day crossband test hosted by the Department of Defense is scheduled for Saturday, May 10th, 2025. The event will test two-way communications between military stations and amateur radio operators, as authorized by the Federal Communications Commission Title 47 of the Code of Federal Regulations 47 CFR 97.111. The test provides opportunities and challenges for operators to test their individual technical skills in a controlled scenario that will not impact public or private communications. The annual Department of Defense message will be transmitted via RTTY on 14.667 kHz at 1400 and 2000 UTC. Military stations will transmit on selected military frequencies and announce the specific amateur radio service frequencies that will be monitored. All scheduled times will be in UTC, and all scheduled transmissions will be upper sideband unless otherwise noted. Frequencies, times, and other technical information can be found at DoD Mars Armed Forces Day. Those who wish to document their contacts with a QSL card should visit www.usarmymars.org and complete the request form. For more than 50 years, military and amateur stations have taken part in this event.
You're listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available worldwide as a podcast from our web at www.twiar.net.
The International Amateur Radio Union, which has just marked the 100th anniversary of its founding in Paris, is using the occasion to look within and to consider a way it can be restructured. The IARU's Administrative Council has released a consultation containing an overview and a number of proposals. Region 2, which covers North, Central, and South America, will be hosting 2 informal meetings on the Zoom platform where Region 2 societies can discuss the document, ask questions, or recommend changes. One Zoom session will be conducted in Spanish on Monday, May 5th, 2025 at 2359 UTC, moderated by Ramon Santoya, XE1KK, former Region 2 president. And then current Region 2 President George Gorsline, VE3YV, will moderate a session on Wednesday, May 7th, in English at 2359 UTC.
If you want to have as many quality QSOs as possible, you want to deploy the best antenna possible. That's why a 40-foot extendable antenna was launched into space aboard a European Space Agency satellite on Tuesday, April 29th, from French Guiana. Its goal is communication with more than 1.5 trillion trees around the world. The biomass probe that has been put into space by the European Space Agency is looking to log trees, but it's not the kind of logging commonly associated with forests. During the next 5 years, this antenna will be using P-band radar transmissions to collect data on how much carbon is stored in trees on a number of continents, and thus gauge climate change as a result of deforestation. According to a report by the BBC, this kind of satellite, with an antenna that is 12 meters in diameter, is the first of its kind for such a mission. The band's relatively long wavelength is an asset because it permits the signals to see deeply inside forests in a manner scientists have compared to how a CT scan operates. The idea was proposed by the National Center for Earth Observation, whose director, John Remedios, told the BBC that the goal is to interrogate these forests.
On May 10th, the APRS Foundation is hosting its first ever online education summit to promote APRS. This groundbreaking event is designed to empower, educate, and inspire anyone interested in the Automatic Packet Reporting System, APRS, from beginners to seasoned operators. Sessions will cover a range of topics from APRS fundamentals to the future of APRS. Question and answer sessions and networking opportunities will also take place. For more details, including registration information, keep an eye on the APRS Foundation website, which is aprs-summit-2025. That's aprs-foundation.org/aprs-summit-2025.
As it turns 100 years old, Nokia Bell Labs is turning elsewhere to continue its important research in the field of technology and science. The company announced that within the next 2 years it will relocate to a smaller but more modern facility in New Brunswick, New Jersey, and out of the lab's longtime home in Murray Hill, New Jersey. Over the years, Bell's scientists have been credited with developing the transistor, making advances in radio astronomy, and being in the vanguard to usher in the digital age. The company has been the recipient of numerous Turing Awards and Nobel Prizes. Its core business continues to be mobile and optical networks and network system support. One of its most recent innovations was the development of circuit boards printed on glass. These are for use in beam steering antennas to get less signal loss in point-to-point fixed wireless. This is considered an important development as wireless communications moves increasingly towards 6G.
An amateur radio society in New Hampshire has a message for radio amateurs regardless of whether they are technician, general, or extra class. If you want to get on the air more, start by getting online, especially on one particular day. On May 10th, the Nashua Area Radio Society is hosting its free ham boot camp on the Zoom platform from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Demonstrations and tutorials will cover emergency communications, satellite operations, FT8, and equipment for VHF and UHF operating. Hams will also learn how to build a station so they can get on the air. In fact, one of the main purposes of the boot camp is to help hams overcome many of the most common obstacles that keep them off the air, everything from how to select the right HT to participating in fox hunting or contesting. For more details, visit November1foxtrotdelta.org.
The Radio Amateur Satellite Corporation promotes its own version of Field Day for operation via the amateur satellites, held concurrently with the ARRL event. This year it should be as much fun as last year, since we have more than 10 transponders and repeaters available. Users should check the AMSAT status page at amsat.org/status for what's available in the weeks leading up to Field Day. If you're considering only FM voice satellites, there's ISS, SO50, PO101, SO124, Sonate 2, and possibly Lilacsat. It may be easier this year to make that one FM contact for the ARRL bonus points with so many FM birds out there. The congestion on FM LEO satellites is always so intense, we must continue to limit their use to 1 QSO per FM satellite. This includes the International Space Station. You'll be allowed 1 QSO if the ISS is operating voice. For more information, including rules and the submission form, go to amsat.org/field-day.
The next New Zealand Straight Key Night will be held on Sunday, June 8th from 9 p.m. to 10 p.m. New Zealand Daylight Time, or 0800 to 0900 UTC on 80 meters. Polish and lubricate that old Morse key and enjoy an evening of old-time radio fun. Straight Key Night is an informal event which honors the roots of amateur radio. Morse code sent with a straight key. No bugs, sideswipers, keyers, or keyboards. Summer Straight Key Night is always the first Sunday in December from 9 p.m. to 10 p.m. New Zealand time. Straight Key Night honors the original amateur radio mode in an easygoing style. Operators send signal report, name, location, type of key, type of transmitter, and power output. Stations are limited to 100 watts of output power. Straight Key Night is not a contest, but the operator who gets the most votes for quality of their sending will win the Bruce Scahill Best Fist Award. This certificate honors Bruce, ZL1 Bravo Whiskey Golf, who was a dedicated supporter of Straight Key Night. Please email your nomination to ZL1 November Z within 1 week following the event.
As it marks the completion of its first 100 years, the South African Radio League, or SARL, has set an ambitious goal for itself, one that takes its efforts beyond South Africa. With age comes wisdom, or so it is said, so as it prepares to mark its centenary in May, the South African Radio League has decided that it would be an especially wise move to nurture amateur radio's growth throughout sub-Saharan Africa. SARL President Nico van Rensburg, ZS6QL, told the website Tech Central that amateur radio is almost non-existent outside of Egypt and Nigeria in the northern part of the continent, and Namibia and South Africa in the south. He said, "You have this middle part of Africa where there is nothing, absolutely nothing." Finding a foothold for amateur radio in less developed parts of the continent will be an ambitious agenda, and SARL acknowledges that. This kind of expansion will need political and financial support. SARL's Chris Turner, ZS6GM, who has been active in amateur radio instruction and mentoring, has already had success with efforts in Mozambique. In that nation, ham radio operators are seen as an asset, especially when floods or other natural disasters require emergency communications. SARL has already kicked off its next 100 years with a centenary marathon QSL party that began on the 1st of January and will continue throughout the year through December 31st. Listen for the special event call sign, which will be ZS100 SARL.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available to download as a podcast from anywhere on the web podcasts are available.
GPS and similar satellite navigation systems revolutionized how you keep track of where you are and what time it is. However, it isn't without its problems. For one, it generally doesn't work very well indoors or in certain geographic or weather scenarios. It can be spoofed. Presumably, a real or virtual attack could take the whole system down. Addressing these problems is a new system called the Broadcast Positioning System, or BPS. It uses the upgraded ATSC 3.0 digital TV transmitters to send exact time information from commercial broadcast stations. With one signal, you can tell what time it is within 100 nanoseconds 95% of the time. If you can hear 4 towers, you can not only tell the time, but also estimate your position within about 100 meters. The whole thing is new. We've read that there are only 6 transmitters currently sending such data. However, you can get a good overview from these slides from the National Association of Broadcasters. They point out that the system works well indoors and can work with GPS, help detect if GPS is wrong, and stand in for GPS if it were to go down suddenly. If all digital TV stations adopt this, the presentation mentions that there would be 516 VHF stations operating with up to 10 kilowatts over 2 widely separated bands. That adds to 1,526 UHF stations running between 100 to 1,000 kilowatts. So lots of power and very diverse in terms of frequencies. Coverage is spotty in some parts of the country, though. A large part of the western United States would lack visibility of the 4 stations required for a position fix. If you read the slide deck, the real story is at the end in the backup slides. That shows the ATSC standard frame and how the preamble changes. The math is fairly standard stuff. You know where the stations are, you know what time they think they sent the signal, and you can estimate the range to each station. With 3 or 4 stations, you can get a good idea of where you must be based on the relative received times. The stations diversify their time sources, which helps guard against spoofing. For example, they may get time information from GPS, the network, a local atomic clock, and even neighboring stations, and use that to create an accurate local time that they send out with their signal. Most of the slides come from more detailed white papers you can find on the NAB website. A lot of the site is dedicated to explaining why you can't live without GPS, but you can't depend on it either. The bottom right part of the page has the technical papers you'll probably be more interested in. GPS is an impressive system, but we know it needs some help. BPS reminded us a bit of Loran.
The AMSAT Forum will take place in Forum Room 2 at 1:35 p.m. to 3:10 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time on Saturday, May 17th. This will immediately follow the ARISS Forum in the same room at 12:40 p.m. EDT. And this reminder, the annual AMSAT Dinner at Tickets party will be held at Tickets Pub and Eatery on Thursday, May 15th from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. EDT. There is no program or speaker, just good conversation. Everyone is invited regardless of whether or not they helped with setup plan or work the booth. Tickets have a great selection of Greek and American food and great company. Food can be ordered from the menu, drinks are available at the bar. Come as you are, no reservations required. Bring some friends and have a great time the night before Hamvention. Tickets Pub and Eatery is located at 7 West Main Street, Fairborn, Ohio.
Charles Kitchen, November 1, Tango Echo Victor, was a tinkerer and builder from an early age when his enthusiasm for radio often split his attention between shortwave and amateur radio. A widely published author of technical articles and books, he earned the nickname among readers and followers as the guru of regen radios. Charles became a silent key on March 17th. No cause of death was listed in his online obituary. As with many hams, Charles combined his passion with his profession. After being discharged from the U.S. Air Force, he worked as a radio engineer at a classical music radio station, WCRB, and would also serve as recording engineer for the live broadcasts of the Boston Symphony Orchestra at Tanglewood in Massachusetts and for other music ensembles. He later became a hardware applications engineer at Analog Devices Semiconductor Division in Massachusetts. He was perhaps most widely known as the popular and prolific contributor to QST magazine and other publications sharing designs of his own creation. Charles was 77.
The Granite State Amateur Radio Association recently visited the Latter-day Saints LDS Youth Group in Peterborough, New Hampshire for a demonstration of ham radio. Club members spent the day sharing their passion for radio technology with over 20 teens and parents. A particularly fun part of the day was teaching Morse code to some of the teens, with many of them learning to spell their names in code, which was a big hit. Also demonstrated was HF, high-frequency radio, giving everyone a taste of long-term distance communication and showing how ham radio can connect people across continents. The teens were also introduced to the concept of Parks on the Air POTA and Summits on the Air SOTA, activities that combine outdoor adventure with radio operation. Several parents and teens eagerly picked up 2-meter handheld transceivers ready to try their hands at local communication. Several amateur radio operators manned the local repeaters, allowing the teens to experience the thrill of making contact with operators from nearby communities. For more information, contact the Granite State Amateur Radio Association. Scouts and Amateur Radio will join together May 3rd, 2025 to celebrate 100 years at the Camp Lazarus Centennial Celebration. Camp Lazarus, located just north of Delaware, Ohio, was deeded to the Boy Scouts in 1925 and has been home to many Simon Kenton Council programs. As a cooperative effort between Simon Kenton Scouts, Delaware, and Franklin County, Ohio, the amateur radio groups, including Franklin County Aries, Delaware County Aries, and the Delaware Amateur Radio Association, and the American Radio Relay League, all amateur radio operators are invited, and the public is also invited, to the open house and centennial celebration. In addition to operational demonstrations of cutting-edge science and technology of amateur radio today, historic artifacts of interest will also be available, and special permission has been received to use the Scouts National Club call sign, KB2SA/8, for the event. Registration for Scouts opens at 8:30 a.m. Pre-registration is encouraged, and events are scheduled from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. The registration fee is $25. For more information, visit Camp Lazarus Centennial Celebration, CampLazarusUpcomingEvent.com on the web.
You're listening to North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, distributed worldwide at twiar.net.
This Week in Amateur Radio is holding open auditions for news anchors for the weekly national worldwide amateur radio news service. If you have a good radio voice and can reliably read provided news copy, we are looking for you. This, of course, is an all-volunteer position. An amateur radio license is not required. You must have a high-quality microphone, headset mics are not used, and be familiar with audio editing software to record and edit your finished news stories before uploading. If you would like to try out for a weekly or bi-weekly anchor position with North America's premier amateur radio news on air and podcast, please send an email to our producer, George, W2XBS. You can include a sample MP3 of yourself reading news copies sent as an attachment to W2XBS77@gmail.com. That's whiskey, the number 2, X-ray Bravo Sierra 77@gmail.com. Be sure and use Anchor Audition in the subject line. Please include your phone number and a good window of time for a callback to discuss your submission and our operating logistics to see if This Week in Amateur Radio is a good fit for you. We hope to hear from you soon.
And finally this week, if you're a fan of science fiction movies, you would have heard of a movie from 2000 entitled Frequency. For this story, John, VK4 JPM, travels to the future, or is that to the past? The movie portrays a typical amateur radio experience. Due to unusual aurora activity, a ham operator gets to talk to his son 30 years in the future on the same transceiver that the father is using in the past. That's not normally what happens on 15 meters, but it's pretty cool yarn involving firemen, cops, the space-time continuum, parallel universes, baseball, and a Heathkit transceiver. If you live in Australia for an undisclosed time, Frequency is available to watch on ABC iView for free. Every ham should see it, and it's safe for a date night with the YL. To find the movie Frequency, go to the ABC iView site and navigate through channels and categories, then movies, science fiction, and Frequency will be in the list if it's still available. Or try the program's A to Z link and scroll to F. You do need to have a free iView sign-in to watch the movie, but the trailer is open. And listen for the classic line, want CW or LSB? Yes, their operating procedures are suspect. Generally, it's better to press the button when you transmit, but we've seen worse technology portrayals in the movies.
This Week in Amateur Radio is heard on nets and repeaters across the country and around the world on great repeater systems like the VK7 RDR repeater on 439.775, also on digital amateur television on 445.500 on the VK7AX H.264 AT repeater serving Ulverstone in Australia, and also via relay on the VK3 RBO DVB-T HD amateur television repeater, also on 445.500 serving Bendigo, Victoria, Australia, and also on the VK3 CE members video stream. Many of the news and information items heard in this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio have been provided by the American Radio Relay League, the ARRL Audio News Service, and the ARRL Letter, AMSAT, the Radio Amateurs of Canada, the Shortwave Listening Post, the Federal Communications Commission, the Radio Society of Great Britain, and Ofcom, the South African Radio League, the International Amateur Radio Union, the Wireless Institute of Australia and the Australian Communications and Media Authority, the New Zealand Association of Radio Transmitters, the Amateur Radio Newsline, the Rain Hamcast, Eric Guth, 4Z1UG and QSO Today, QRZ.com, the International Telecommunications Union, the 425DX News, Parks on the Air, and the Soda Reflector, and various news sources on the Internet.
With special thanks to all our weekly news sources and to you, our listeners, that wraps up this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio. If you'd like to write to us, you can find everything you need, including archive editions of the news service, at our website at twiar.net. And now, for all of us at This Week in Amateur Radio headquarters and our news team around the world, this is Chris Perrine, KB2FAF, wishing you a 73.